All right, welcome everybody to the beauty and lore of spring blooming trees. My name is Anna Ka'ahanui and I am co-founder of Capital Nature. And I'm really excited today to introduce to you our two presenters. So Alonso Abugattas, he's the natural resources manager for Arlington County, but you may know him as being the famous Capital Naturalist on Facebook. He also has a blog.
I'm watching. I'm not.
Please, everybody, please mute yourselves if you can. That would be great. Thank you. Again, so we're talking about Alonso being the Capital Naturalist and with his blog and his Facebook page. I consider him a walking encyclopedia. I've had the pleasure of going on hikes with him, especially through the Master Naturalist programs, where he is an instructor for. He's also written a book called The Reptiles and Amphibians of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, which I have used to identify herps. He's actually working on a revision of that. I'm gonna have to ask everybody to mute yourselves, please. Thanks. We're so happy to have Alonso on the Capital Nature Advisory Board. And he's pretty much a rock star in the naturalist community. And we're thrilled that he's here to talk about spring blooming trees. Melinda Peters is the Director of Education at KC Trees, and she has had a career with plants, both living and dead. She has a master's at Harvard in Museum Studies, where she focused on education in the living botanical collections. She came to DC to work on the US National Herbarium at the Smithsonian, which she says it's like being a librarian for dead plants. And then she finally got to work with living specimens at the National Arboretum, where she oversaw their volunteer programs. And then her journey led her to today to KC Trees, where she's the Director of Education. So we are so pleased. I love working with these guys. So we're so pleased to have them here today to present to you. And I'm going to turn it over to Stella.
Thank you very much, Anna, and welcome everyone. We're so happy to see you here during this lunch hour break with spring and with nature. I'm Stella Tarne, and I'm co-founder and executive director of Capital Nature. And I'll tell you just a little bit about Capital Nature and why we're here for this program. So Capital Nature is a nonprofit that serves the Washington, D.C. metro area. And our mission is to bring nature into people's lives. And that seems like a very simple thing, but if any of you recall how much time you or any of us spends in front of a screen or sitting indoors, then you know that sometimes it's the one thing we forget. So our mission is to bring nature to you. And we do it through shared information and stories, for one. And so I'll tell you in just a second about our regional calendar. There's a lot going on regionally that is waiting to be explored and discovered. And so that's part of our mission. We also create original programs ourselves, such as this one, which is virtual. This is the third in a series we have with KC Trees. And also, I should mention, Anna does these wonderful virtual nature immersions, which are kind of partly outdoors and partly on a screen, but they still bring you out into the natural world. And then when we can, we do in-person urban nature walks, forest therapy experiences, and one of our favorite activities, citizen science. And we're organizers of the Regional City Nature Challenge, along with a whole host of other organizations. And that's one plug I'll give to others than ourselves. If you go to citynaturechallengedc.org, you can find out about how you can get involved as a citizen scientist. So just some of the ways that you can engage with Capital Nature and with the natural world and activities in that area. Anna, if you could post the next slide. This is just a shot of our regional calendar. So I encourage you to go to that when you go to capitalnature.org. Our March calendar is still being built up a little bit because there's been a shift in park agency events. So there was a little pause. So take a look at that calendar today and then again next week. And there's an awful lot going on that we support and we'd love to get people engaged in. And with that, I would like to turn the mic over to Alonso.
For a few minutes. Well, I'm very happy to be here, even more so partnering with some of these great groups. And I'm happy that you guys are here to learn a little bit about some blooming trees and so forth. As people know, I depend a lot on people's observations and things like that. And I hope that you learned something really neat about the beauty and lore of spring blooming trees. Next slide, please. So first of all, some shameless self-promotion, if you guys don't mind. I of course, do a lot of things at Capital Naturalist. When I became a natural resources manager with Arlington, that made me more of a paper pusher and more of an office person than anything else. So this is my way to continue with environmental education. And so I invite you guys to follow along, and hopefully you guys can follow along any of the different social media venues that I have with Capital Naturalist. Next slide, please. So folks, there are a ton of different kinds of things having to do with blooming trees and shrubs. And here's the thing, this particular talk will focus on the things that we're more familiar with, those that are insect pollinated more so than wind pollinated. Not just because they're more showy, because they're of course trying to attract the pollinators, but just something that we may notice a little bit more. But that does not mean that we should ignore some of the wonderful other wind pollinated trees and shrubs, which include things like oaks and things like chinkapins and things like that, which are beautiful in their own right, but are outside the venue of what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so we'll be looking at some of the stuff that's more visual. So we're going to start off with the different kinds of dogwoods. And I know most people think about flowering dogwood, but in reality, here are some of the several kinds of dogwoods we have locally. Okay, so first of all, we had gray dogwood on the top left, and that is one that that's a little bit rarer to find, but is a very important small shrub that we have. Next one over, the Kusa, is a non-native, and unfortunately, that's probably how the dogwood and anthracnose entered into the area, which unfortunately is affecting our flowering dogwood and some of the other trees. But again, it's a non-native. Then we have red osier dogwood, something that people plant as a native plant, but actually is not local. But it's easy to notice when it's in fruit because of its white fruits that it have. Next one over is the alternate or pagoda dogwood. And the neat thing about this one is almost all dogwoods are opposite, meaning that the branches and twigs face each other, opposite sides of the same stem. But this is different. This one's alternate and is very, very different, but it's not as common, but a neat one to have. And I've raised them before in different nurseries, and a fantastic plant to have around. And then we have another one, the silkier, what they call the swamp dogwood. Very small, easy to see, but you have to be in the right habitat. And this one likes swampy bog areas and so forth, but a fantastic type of tree. So again, a couple of quick things about dogwoods in general. Again, most of them, except for alternate or pagoda dogwoods, are opposite branching. They host a whole slew of 118 different caterpillar species, and they also feed about 93 different birds that have been found feeding on the drupes, and probably much more than that. Next slide, please. But we're going to focus on the flowering dogwood, which is, of course, the state tree and the state plant for Virginia, a twofer, if you will. Again, it's got the same things as other dogwoods as far as how many caterpillars, how many birds feed on it. But the drupes, which is what the fruits are called, they also feed a ton of mammals. There's 12 different beetles that use it. A lot of people notice it for a couple of reasons. One, it's got alligator bark, as it were. And if you see it, that's easy to see. And right now, before they bloom, on the bottom right, you can see that they have very distinctive buds that right now are just bursting to come forth. So easy to tell even in wintertime if you see it in bud. It also has what's called fruit flagging. So it's such a small tree in the woods that it's easy for birds to miss it as they're flying over. So about the same time that the fruits are turning red, the foliage is also turning red. So you have the small tree, which is very bright, and so it basically flags down any passing birds that it's a great food plant for them for their trip down south. And that's how it attracts attention to people to come eat its drupes. That, unfortunately, is also one of the reasons why the anthracnose has been spreading, because as birds land on this, and again, the anthracnose was probably introduced by the non-native Kusa dogwood, and our native dogwoods don't have resistance to it. And so when a bird comes down to eat the fruit, it is likely going to step along the branches and thus get the spores and so forth on its own feet. And if it travels down, it'll continuously add that to the next tree that comes. And that's an unfortunate thing that does happen. So one of the other things is there's all sorts of legends and so forth on this. I have two links here. And again, as you will see in almost all of these, you can learn more about them by either hitting the blog there, or if there's a YouTube video, and you can always find out more about them. On this particular one, what I wanted to mention is that this thing has a great deal of legend, and much of the legend that surrounds it in the United States is Christian based, simply because those are the people who recorded and the colonists that came over early on. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the legend of the cross, and it has something to do like this. At one point, they say that the dogwoods were giant trees, and with very strong wood. And because of this, legend has it that it was the wood that was used to make the cross that they crucified Jesus on. Now, the plant, the tree hated that it was used in this for this, and so it begged for forgiveness that it was used in this. And since then, they say that the tree never grows as big as it originally did. It's supposedly is slender. It's kind of twisted, so it can't really be used for this for crosses anymore. But it still kept a reminder of what had happened before. And if you look at its leaves, that's a reminder of it. So, for example, in the middle, you have what sometimes is looked at as the crown of thorns, a memory of that. The petals are in a cross shape, but at the very end of it, you'll see that there's this little notch in there that's usually painted red, and that is supposedly a symbol of the nails that were being driven into the cross. And again, there's a lot of different legends and lores about this. Many of them do focus in Christianity, simply because those are the ones that have been recorded early on. And again, I will mention those as we come along. So on to the next plant. Next slide, yes. So here we're going to go with northern spicebush, which in fact just about now is just starting to bless our woods with its bright yellow flowers. Now the flowers themselves are small and look inconspicuous, but at this time of year when there's not a lot blooming, they really stand out. And some people compare it a lot to forsythia, and both its color and the timing of when it blooms. So it's wonderful right now seeing it along the woods and adding some color into what can often be a dreary time of year. So this particular plant hosts about 11 different caterpillars. There's at least 17 birds and probably a lot more that feed on this. And the reason that again, there's probably much more to recorded, and the reason is that because it's high in lipids and proteins, and so this is probably a very small little sampling of it. This is remarkably deer resistant. This along with pawpaws, and so the deer don't like it, and because of this, deer are shaping our woods. So where a lot of other plants are becoming less common, now we see that both pawpaws and spicebush are becoming much more common. Why? Because deer don't eat this, but they eat the other plants, and that frees up the resources and the space for the spicebush and stuff to come along. So, but if you're having problems with deer, that is one of the other benefits of it, is that it really is something that the deer don't like to eat. It is shade tolerant, does grow in the middle of the woods. If you want to know more, there's a little bit more in this small I should say YouTube video upon on it. It's been used in a variety of different ways. I'm going to mention something here, and I should have mentioned it with the dogwood as well, and that is that during the Civil War, the Confederate forces picked one of their doctors, Dr. Francis Porcher, to come up with alternate uh, things that they could make locally, because the blockades that the North was doing was eliminating much of what they could bring in. And so because of this, Dr. Francis Porcher and some of his Confederates put together some great list, a fantastic thing about different things that could be used instead of what was normally available. And again, it's sometimes summed up as the Confederate ethnobotany, but a fantastic series of things. If you ever do see the book, and it is available virtually at least, you do have to realize that a lot of names have changed, so you do have to look at it. But it's fantastic because sometimes they say that necessity makes makes new versions of things, and war really created a lot of need for this. So for example, Francis Porcher, when quinine was no longer available, he said that you can use this as a substitute for quinines. So basically, I'm sorry, I'm talking about, I kind of slipped over. I was talking about the dogwood. You basically take one or two of the the fruits, and they can make a pill out of them. So the same thing could be said with spicebush, where Francis Porcher said that the berries themselves would be good for bruises. and he knew that this was a substitute for allspice, and they said that you could use it that way. I've eaten it that way before. It's great with venison. And they say all the different parts of the trees taste differently. So the twigs can be made, you can make a tea out of it, which was used medicinally, and they said was good against worms for deworming. The tea also was good for pneumonia, for coughs and cold. But the leaves can also make a much more flavorful tea. And as I mentioned, you can crush up the berries complete with the seeds, and it was great for venison and other types of things. Now, Daniel Moorman, who studied a lot, he spent his whole career looking at the ways that the Native Americans used these different plants. He realized that spicebush itself was used by several different tribes. So the Cherokee, they used it for coughs and colds, much less Porcher mentioned himself. They used it for measles. You can make a tea out of it, as I've already mentioned. Porcher also copied that. The Iroquois also used for colds and fevers, for measles. And in fact, they thought it was a panacea. You could use this for any time you weren't feeling well. And again, for venereal disease. So again, just common practice of what people made use of these things, both in ancient times and so forth when with her native peoples, but also what the Confederates and so forth decided to use when they could no longer get the fruits that they needed. So on to the next slide. So here we go at serviceberry, one of my favorites, and one luckily which is landscaped quite a bit. Wonderful because tons of things eat it. 42 different species of birds feed it. 124 caterpillars feed on it, which then feeds 96% of our land birds that feed insects to their young, and all of our local bats. 24 different mammals eat it, including people. And again, you see at the top there, I've got some here in my yard, and I love collecting the fruit and eating. It's fantastic. Tons of pollinators come forward. There's a lot more in the blog that I wrote about service berries. And because it's sometimes the berries are available by June, they sometimes call it June berries. The name shad blow or shad bush comes because it supposedly blooms at about the right time that your shad are running. A great reminder for fishermen and things like that to go get this one. Is much more available. The word service berries say that it was in bloom by the time that the ground was soft enough that you could bury people, and also by the time that the priests and so forth would be able to travel around to actually come by and do services. And so that's another name for it, is serviceberry. But again, it's kind of neat. It's been used for a lot of different things, including the native people used it for arrow shafts and so forth, for making baskets. Some people said it could use it for both eye and ear medicine. So a ton of those things. Some people also used it for treating stomach sicknesses and so forth. Oh, I will say something about the fruits themselves. The bad news is if you do have cedar and other types of things like that that host cedar apple rust, hawthorns would be another example. Unfortunately, you sometimes get the rust on these things that it makes, unfortunately, the berries unedible to people. But other than that, a fantastic tree which is being more planted, and I know I have it in my yard. On to the next one, please. So this next one is probably my favorite small shrub because I love it in bloom. So this is buttonbush. And even though most people realize that this grows along swamps and so forth, it can easily grow in regular garden soil. So over 24 birds that feed on it, 19 different caterpillars, great for pollinators. And in fact, most people realize that yes, tons of pollinators visit during the daytime. But if you've ever visited it, and again, probably that's something only naturalists do, visit a swamp at night, it's fantastic because not only does it attract butterflies during the day, but in the evenings, tons of moths come to it and beetles, and fantastic to see those things. And by the way, during the daytime, I've seen hummingbirds visit it. So again, I got a little blog on that as well. And again, buttonbush has a ton of different names. It's also called honey balls, button willow, as sometimes called pinball, little snowballs, pond dogwood, crane willow, globe flower, river bush. These are all different names for it. Again, going back to Francis Porcher, the Confederate general that I mentioned that found these, that tried to develop all sorts of alternate uses for plants. He said, and he called it crane willow in his writings. It was useful for coughs, and they also said that to make a syrup out of it that was used for all sorts of different things, including as an antivenereal treatment. Daniel Moorman, who already mentioned, collected all of these things from the native people. He said that the Chickasaw used it when they had sore eyes. It was something that they used quite a bit. The Seminole people, they used it for headaches, and also said it was great for treating things like diarrhea, urinary disorders, things like that, constipation, all of these kinds of things. They also used it. Some of them were great at using buttonbush for things like fevers, stomach problems, all of that. It can even be used as a laxative for a variety of different uses for the same kind of plant. The Choctaw, again, also used it for their eyes, much as some other people did, and also thought it was good for dysentery and fever. So a ton of different times of uses for this. By the way, the scientific thing, Cephalanthus, it basically translates to head flower, and it's just a conglomeration of all sorts of different flowers that go together. So when an insect lands, a pollinator, it can feed on a variety of different flowers, which are all compacted together to make up this the buttonbush flower itself. On to the next one, please. So here we're going to talk about viburnums, and even though we have something like 4 different viburnums, and again at the very end I've talked a little bit. I've got you can check on there. There's a variety of neat videos and so forth. You can learn about them. But as a group, viburnums, they support about 104 caterpillars, which again feed all of our local bats, 96% of our birds, especially while they're nesting. Over 35 birds, because the fruits are fantastic for them. And again, there's a lot of other things, including mammals, to feed on them. I'm going to talk a little bit about this one in particular. This is black haw, and black haw is one of my favorites. My granddaughter loves to find it in the fall. They're very sweet, even though there's not a lot of fruit to the black haw themselves, but it's fantastic. Now, I will say black haw was used medicinally. It was actually part of the U.S. pharmacopoeia for several years, all the way into 1926. And they said that if you did have that, it was useful for all sorts of things, such as treating urinary tract disorders. It was good after miscarriages, good for asthma. It was useful for diarrhea. So it was used as something professionally, at least in the pharmacopoeia, as something about that. So again, a wonderful plant. And if you want to learn more about some of the other versions of viburnums, whether some of the shade tolerant ones like maple leaf viburnum, some of the more colorful ones like arrowwood, which is used for making arrow shafts, some of the bog ones like possum haw viburnum. Again, I've got videos at the end that you can always link to and learn more about it. On to the next one, please. So here we got elderberries, and elderberries are fantastic. What a fantastic plant. Easy to grow, 120 birds feed on it. It's just fantastic. 42 different kinds of caterpillars feed on it as well. Lots of mammals like to eat the fruit, and because the pits are very easy to hollow out, all sorts of different kinds of burrow nesting bees use it, including osmia, some of our mason bees, and serratinas. So if you ever were to find it, you sometimes, as you see in the middle slide, you see where they're all ripped up. Why? Because the woodpeckers and other types of birds know how to go in there to learn more about elderberries. So again, I've got a blog on it, but a little bit more about elderberries. So again, there's lots of different kinds. The most common one is black elderberry. And again, going back to Francis Porcher, the Confederate doctor, he said that you can use it. And here's one of the funny things, because even though elderberry is edible, in its pure form, if you eat it raw or you consume its leaves, it can be poisonous. And again, if you use it, it can cause stomach upset and things like that. Now, me in my misspent youth, I had heard about elderberry, and I did eat the berries raw, which is not the right way of doing it. But luckily, nothing really happened to me. I guess I got an iron gut, as it were. But Porcher said that you would take it, and what it would do, it was a drastic purgative. It would make you throw up and vomit in a lot of different ways. In less mild form, it was used as a laxative. You could add it to boiling water, and it would say to keep flies and stuff away. So again, lots of different uses for it. But again, you can use it with caution, if you will, and you do need to cook it. But done so, who hasn't heard of elderberry wine? And of course, you can make pies and stuff out of it, which is a lot like the Cherokees did. They also used it for that. They also used the leaves and the fruits for treating burns, for boils, for all sorts of different kinds of things. So a great all-purpose type of plant that's easy to grow. The Iroquois, they also made a poultice out of it to treat headaches. It's all sorts of for kidney disorders, lots of different things that the native people also used it for. And again, I'm just using a couple of examples. If you ever look up Daniel Moorman's treaty on this, you know, he lists just tons of other tribes that also use it. I'm only mentioning a couple of the more ones of the names of perhaps of the tribes you may have heard more from. So going on to the next one, please. So here we're going to go on to maples, and fantastic as far as maples are. First of all, they're opposite branching, as I mentioned before. So everywhere you see one twig, you see another one coming over to the side. Fantastic for how much it supports, because 297 caterpillars feed on the different kinds of maples. And again, going into some of these different kinds from left to right, you got sugar maple, where we reach kind of the southern limit on it. These in the future, if there is a lot of climate change, most of these will disappear. But we have a few places where we still have sugar maple, famous of course for its red foliage as well. Silver maple, which again grows near water and so forth. Silver, because if you turn the leaf over, you can see how light a color underneath. It's a wonderful kind of plant itself, but a lot of times it grows big. It breaks very easily. People don't like it for that kind of reason. The next one over is Norway maple, an invasive that if you have, you should destroy because it competes with our native plants and so forth. One big way of telling it apart while it's still growing, break off a twig, and if you get this milky sap coming out, you have a Norway maple, and you should destroy it. And then we'll be talking more about red maple, but then we have another one called box elder maple, and box elder, sometimes called poison ivy tree because of the ways that its leaves look, is yet another maple that we have. Even though we have a lot of them, we're going to focus just on one. So on to the next slide, please. We'll talk about red maple. Again, there's a nice little blog on it if you want to look at it. It has the opposite branching. Some people way back when, although they changed some of it, may have heard what they called mad capped horse. It was a way of learning the things which were opposite branching. So mad was maple, A was for ashes, D was for dogwood, cap was for caprifoliaceae, which included the honeysuckles and viburnums, which have been separated out, and horse for horse chestnut. And that was one old time memory type of thing that people used when I was learning plants to kind of help you decipher the opposite ones from the other ones. So again, that's to it. It has red colors due to the anthocyanins that basically after the chlorophyll leaves shows the red coloring. It's deer resistant, so it does dominate in some places when there is overpopulation of deer. And it's kind of neat because the beautiful middle flowers are both wind pollinated as well as insect pollinated. So a wonderful, unusual type of things. But again, we're going on to some of the uses of it. There's a ton. So again, Daniel Moorman talked about the Cherokee using it. And they used it for treating cramps and measles, diarrhea, hives, all of these different kinds of things. They made a ton of different kinds of uses for it. There were also a ton of tribes that made an eye wash from the actual bark. And that eye wash, Moorman listed as the Ojibwa, the Iroquois, the Potawatomi, all of them used this as an eye wash for and you got to remember, since many of these tribes lived inside using fires and so forth to keep warm, there were a lot of there was a lot of sore eyes. So that is something else that kind of happened. The Iroquois also used it, and they even used the bark to actually make bread from, which is kind of an interesting kind of side thing. The Seminole, they thought they could use it for treating everything from hemorrhoids to sore limbs, back muscles. In fact, they thought that it was great for what they called ball game sickness, which meant lacrosse, and you get hurt doing lacrosse, and so this was great for muscle aches, back aches, whatever the case may be. So again, a neat little thing. Going back to Francis Porter, the Confederate general, he again, having learned and looked up some of the things about what the native peoples used it for, he also said you could use it for eyes, for sore eyes. And he did mention you can make maple syrup, which you can make out of any of the maples along with some of the other trees that we have. But it never produces as much of the sugary sap as do sugar maples. So you'd have to do a lot of time. And it was also shorter blooming. So they said it was not the ideal thing, but you could make maple syrup out of it. Going on to the next slide. So we have tulip trees, and tulip trees are fantastic, okay? Tons of different names: tulip tree, tulip poplar, yellow poplar, white wood, canoe wood, fiddle tree, saddle leaf tree, ton of different names. Now, we'll go over a couple of them. First of all, it's not a true poplar, okay? Even though people call it that, now it's more correct to call it a tulip tree. Tulip tree because the flowers do look a little bit like a tulip on there and so forth, but it's not a true poplar. It's actually more closely related to magnolias and so forth. But regardless, people have grown up calling it that. The canoe wood, because it grows so straight and narrow, but the wood is so soft that you could make dugout canoes out of it. In fact, because back then you have to remember there wasn't a lot of tools that you could use. You needed to burn, and you could use stone tools to shape this, and so it was very, very popular to do that. In fact, when people were coming through into Virginia and exploring, they made a lot of observations about it. So they said, for example, they would see these dugout canoes coming in with some of the Powhatans and other Algonquian-speaking people, and each of them could carry something like 40 warriors, a fantastic type of thing. Now, if you keep on reading, and they say that Daniel Boone supposedly saw a 60-foot one that actually held, something like 35 people. So again, tall, straight growing. It drops its limbs, leaving these particular scars on there, especially in the shade. It drops some of the limbs that don't get the sunlight. Could we go back, please? Thank you. So again, a lot of interesting different kinds of things. These trees are fast growing, and even though they're softwood, they can live up to 500 years, and again, over 180 feet tall. And some people say they got the third widest trunks of any of the trees that we have here on the East Coast. You can easily see 30-foot trunks in some of the ancient trees. And again, I've got some great pictures of me and my family, all of us across the front of a tulip tree down in Tennessee in the Smokies. And guess what? We could all fit easily inside the tree. So again, it produces these flowers, and lots of times you don't notice them because they're so far up, but animals do. And I've seen orioles feeding on it. I've seen raccoons sitting there and sipping it. And of course, we can sip it too, as you can see in the bottom left corner. It's sugary sweet, but it's hard to reach any of the plants unless it's a low-growing tree that's growing in full sun, so as it drops some of its outer limbs. But it's fantastic eating. But I will mention, before you lick any of the stuff that's in there, make sure there are no ants, because it's very popular with ants as well. And one other thing, that when I used to go out with, teach classes and so forth, usually these things are turning yellow, and the shade leaves, which oftentimes on new growing trees are much bigger than the regular leaves. I would find the shade leaves, and I would have the kids, make little cat mass out of them, as you can see on the picture on the left. Just pop 2 holes out of it, and you had a nice little cat mask. I would send the kids home with a little cat mask for them to wear for Halloween. So a wonderful tree, the tulip tree. Again, I mentioned some of the different things that we used for. Daniel Mormon listed the Cherokee used it for treating pinworm, for treating dysentery, boils, fever, all sorts of different kinds of things. And again, during the Civil War, Francis Porcher, he also found different uses for this. He also said you can use it for treating things such as worms and so forth. He said in his book, he said it was a great substitute for what he called Peruvian bark. Okay, this was quinine, and again, since quinine was unavailable, and there was a lot, malaria and so forth, they would use this and dogwood as something to treat it. Fantastic different kinds of things. And again, he also said that you could make a poultice out of it. It was great for headaches and so forth. And that was what Francis Porcher mentioned. On to next one. So wild black cherry, and even though I know that people think about the Japanese cherry with the festivals and so forth, wild black cherry is the largest cherry that we have locally. We don't have choke cherries, anything like that, and it was used by a ton of different people. In fact, it was one of the most used trees by the native peoples. Okay, I will say Francis Porcher in his writings, he said it was great for making cherry liqueur, and it is kind of funny because he made this book, and there are several recipes of how to make alcoholic drinks throughout his treatise. This was one that he said that you could use, and he also mentioned some of the neat things about it. And he said because there is something akin to cyanide and the twigs and so forth, it could be used for treating worms. All right. So again, it was a wonderful types of things. He also said that was really good for treating of all things. Things like black flies and other types of things that bot flies that affected horses. So he used that as a suggestion as well. So again, a pretty neat little a pretty neat little thing about it. As I mentioned, the cherry, a lot of the native people use it for coughs and colds. It's still used for flavoring all sorts of cough medicines. They used it for ulcers. The Cherokee used it for laryngitis, things like that. Lots of people made use of it for treating worms, whether it was the Chippewa, the Cherokee, whatever the case may be. The Delaware also used it for sore throats, which makes sense as we use it too. And for dressing burns, a ton of different uses for wild black cherry. On to the next one, please. So here are Eastern Redbud, which will soon be in bloom and just is wonderful. So lots of neat things about Eastern Redbud. First of all, it has a neat little way that it grows. Something that is often called cauliflory. So cauliflory meaning that it actually grows. Its flowers from along its trunks, as you can see in the top left picture, which is something that's much more common in tropical trees, but it does happen here. If you see the big heart-shaped leaves, you oftentimes see these little cutouts out of it. It's a favorite of leafcutter bees to use for making their nests. And I love the flowers, which are perfectly edible. I eat them every year they come up. I rescued one on the top right. You see the one that I rescued that I have in my yard now. And I love taking the little flowers out of it, fighting all the pollinators. And if you look at them, they do look like little hummingbirds. But again, you can eat this. So there is another legend about this, which is very similar to the dogwood legend. And again, it said there was a gigantic, beautiful tree with white flowers. And again, they say that unfortunately, according to Christian legend, when Judas Iscariot betrayed Jesus, he felt so mad about what he had done and so forth that he hung himself from a redbud tree. And so he committed suicide, which is a great sin in some Christian religions. And when he did that, the tree was so ashamed that it had this role in having someone commit suicide that that its wood would always be short. It would never grow big anymore. It would be brittle. And the flowers, no longer pure, no longer white, turned into what we see now as their probable color. So another name for Eastern Redbud is Judas tree, going back to this legend. So again, kind of a neat little thing. This does coast 19 different caterpillars, 13 leafhoppers, 6 different beetles. It can live for about 75 years and starts producing flowers after 4 to 5 years. The Cherokee used it for coughs. It's again a beautiful thing that's still fitting and fitting how beautiful it is at a state tree of Oklahoma. So wonderful types of things, and a ton of people ate both the flowers, and if you get the young pods, they can also be edible, much like little green beans. On to the next one, please. So we hear of black locust, and again, another tree that you can eat the flowers. I loved eating them, although I will say they're a little sickly sweet, so you got to be careful about them. It's easy to kind of overgrow it, as it were. Ton of neat little names: yellow locust, false acacia, again because the leaves look a lot like acacia. It is a pioneer tree, so it comes up quick and oftentimes gets shaded over, and it no longer lives after that. But out in the fields where it can grow, where it doesn't have any competition, it can last for a very long time. Incredibly tough wood for it, used in fence posts and so forth. It's a favorite of different kinds of bees. I already mentioned how edible the flowers themselves are. The Chickasaw used the roots to treat headaches and so forth. It was used as a bitter medicine using the bark of it. Okay, so again, the Cherokee probably made the most of it. Not only did they eat the flowers, but they used it for toothaches. They used it to induce vomiting. They make from the bark, they could make different kinds of bows. They're one of the few tribes down south that used blowguns, so they used it for making blowgun darts. Again, it was used in log cabins, again, because of how long the wood lasts and how resistant it is to rotting. So we'd use it a lot in log cabins, especially for making the pegs that would hold some of the things together. Again, if you go back to Francis Porcher, he said that you can make a syrup out of it from the blooms. That was really good for if you had problems vomiting and things like that. But he did say another caution, and I never saw this to be the case, but eating too many flowers caused you to be a little fatigued. So who knows? They say that the little pods can be eaten as well, but again, I'm not sure if that is the case. Um, the inner wood of it sometimes will be used for making rope, for making cordage. Again, a wonderful type of tree that still grows. On to the next one, please. So here, I know I've gone, there's a lot of things to look at. So I'm just going to leave you with this collection of different kinds of things. Not all of them, since you're going to get a PDF of this, will be shareable, but you can just look, Capital Naturalist, mountain laurel, and you can find out a little bit about mountain laurels. And this is just a small sampling. There's many, many other ones, and I only listed the ones which are the most common of different kinds, either in a YouTube or a video that you can find. But again, folks, a ton of different kinds of things. So go out there, enjoy the beautiful spring trees we have, but also realize that as beautiful as they may be, they have lots of wildlife uses as well. And again, I mentioned some of these and many of these things that we have. On to the next slide, please. So I will end with yet another shameless self-promotion of my social media things. And with that, I will end my presentation. And if we have any time left, I don't want to take too much time. I'll be happy to answer a couple of questions perhaps.
Thanks, Alonso.
Mhm.
Now we have Melinda.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Alonso, for that fantastic overview of some of our blossoming trees in the area. So you can go to next, Donna.
Sure. My cursor, there you go.
Great. And thanks to Capital Nature for hosting. First, before we share some resources, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about KC Trees. We are a DC-based nonprofit with the mission to restore, enhance, and protect the tree canopy of our nation's capital. And we work within the boundaries of DC, but to fulfill this mission, we plant trees, we engage thousands of volunteers of all ages in tree planting and tree care, of course, in non-pandemic time. And we provide year-round education courses. And we work a lot with city officials, developers, and community groups to protect and care for these. Many of you, I'm sure, have hopefully been out to one of our tree plantings or joined us for some group. And we're not the only ones in this area. I know there's a lot of master naturalists on here. It's really great to see you all and to keep continuing to do the work that you do to learn more and protect our green spaces. So we'd love to keep in touch, and we'll send more info on how to sign up for our newsletter, so you can be first to know when we're back up and running with our volunteer programs in the coming up, hopefully, summer and fall. All right, so let's dive into some really cool resources that will hopefully help you find some blossoms in the area. As I mentioned, part of our KC Trees beginning, we inventoried the trees of the city. And because of that, we now have a really great collection of data that we've compiled over the years, and we were able to map and share. And this just shows a little snapshot of the variety of tree maps that we've produced to provide some really cool resources on how to find and how to identify places. I just want to point out that the DC Street Tree Map is developed in partnership with the DC Urban Forestry Division, who manages all the street trees in the city. And then KC Trees, we manage a lot of the other residential and privately owned and park space trees in the city. So let's zoom in and take a closer look at the DC blossoming tree map that we've created. Great. So again, we'll send them some links because this is something you can use live, but I just wanted to zoom in and take a closer look at the Fort Reno Park area that's located in Northwest DC. So let's go there. We've zoomed in one more layer, and you see the legend on the right there. And then a little bit closer, we're going to zoom in on the red buds that are right in this area. And then you can check out some information about the tree. So again, these are some really cool resources that we have. It's just a fun way to track and see what's sort of blooming or what's lining your street. And of course, you have to come back, seasonally, and that's a great way to start practicing and keeping in touch with what's growing in your space. Another really great resource, next, Anna, is the iNaturalist app. This is a great tool to use in our area. And it's a citizen science or crowdsourcing effort. That's a great way to learn how to practice tree ID and many other species. It's pretty simple. You record your observations, you share with other naturalists, and you can discuss findings. And Stella mentioned earlier, you can take part in the upcoming City Nature Challenge. It's going to be at the end of April by using this app. And we'll definitely share more details, and Capital Nature will have information on that too. It's going to be a great way to get involved. And if we're just keeping with the theme of highlighting, I mean, one of my favorites is Red Buds. I can't wait. It's coming out soon.
Thanks so much, Melinda.
Yeah,
And,
thank you.
Another resource that we wanted to offer or mention to you guys are the books that are available. And Casey Trees has their new species guide coming out next month. I'm really excited. I have the older edition. I walk around with it on my tree walks. It's wonderful. It's spiral bound. I think it's waterproof pages. So it's going to be a perfect thing to take in the field. And so we actually got to see a sneak peek. Melinda had one yesterday that she held up on a Zoom. So we got all excited. So those will be coming out next week and probably available on their website. City of Trees, one of our advisory board members, Melanie Chukas Bradley, who is a wonderful naturalist and author. She has written one of the, the field guides of DC area tree species. So that's a great resource. Plant Nova Natives, they have this wonderful booklet, Native Plants for Northern Virginia. Obviously, it doesn't have to be Virginia, it's the area, but really great resource in terms of making decisions of what native plants you can do to help bring wildlife to your garden and to your yard. And then a lot of people know about Doug Talamy and what he's been doing and trying to get people to use native plants to help out with the wildlife and the ecosystem. So you definitely want to check out his Bringing Nature Home book. He's got a couple other books. He's got a book on oaks that's just coming out. And actually Alonso is going to be doing a podcast interview with him on that. So watch around for that when he posts that. And with that, I'm just going to show you our contact information. And then we're going to open it up to questions. I also want to apologize for the red streak that we have through our slides. Somebody maybe was trying to draw or practice. So we'll fix that for next time once we figure out how that happened. But anyway, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then we're just going to go ahead and look in the Q&A in the chat box and see if we have any questions.
If I could add too, if I believe my reptile book is available to Audubon Natural Society, and if not, anytime you see me, I'll be happy to have you one. The Native Plant Podcast will be taking place at the end of this month, and it'll be about a month before it's available.
Thanks, Alonso. Okay, so I'm going through some of the questions here. Let's see.
While we're waiting, I'll also point out that, cherry blossoms are coming, and we're going to be hosting a talk later this month that's discussing some of the stories and details about the blossoms of the tidal basin, but where the other places in the area you can see some great collections.
I answered a couple of the questions in the chat, but again, if people have other questions, please either type them in or, I don't know how we're doing as far as voicing it in.
You could also raise your hand if you wanted to, too, if we can see you, or with your little annotations, and we can call on you.
So I believe that the PDF will be available to people who did sign up for this. And so if I'm not mistaken, again, correct me if I'm wrong, you will get a copy of the PDF, which includes the slides.
That's correct. So we will make sure that all those links are clickable in that PDF for Alonso. And we'll be sending that in a follow-up email, including a link to the recording and links to some upcoming programs. We also have just a short survey to ask you, about yourself and that type of thing. And so we'll be sending a link for that as well.
Anyway, I'm curious for folks who are on the Zoom with us, have you started noticing any of the early spring blooms? If you wanted to share on the chat or in person, what are you noticing in your neighborhoods? I'm just starting to notice like the tiniest bit of a budding, and I'm curious whether you're seeing that in your own neighborhoods.
I just saw a magnolia today. Yep, maples are exploding.
Yes, definitely the maples.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing those too.
So we will probably be doing a few more of these as part of a series. So again, thank you to Capital Nature as well as Casey Trees. We'll be hopefully providing some more things in the near future. So just so you know, it's been very successful thanks to you guys, and we hope to continue this kind of thing.
Yeah.
North
And
Spicebush, Redbud. That's great.
so
I've been
those-
to Spicebush. I keep every time I walk my dog with my husband, I stop to do the smell test of the Spicebush. Just a little teeny scrape there to smell it because it's so cool.
I know
And-
there's a lot of folks from Northern Virginia, but yeah, you'll have to come into the city and check out one of the tree maps to practice your ID skills.
And if anyone's tried Spicebush, it's very interesting because if you do make a tea out of it, the tea that you get from the leaves is very much different from what you get from the twigs. So you can make it. And again, some people like it, some people don't. But it is a neat little thing. I've tried both, and it's very different.
I've made tea out of the twig, so I think I'll try the leaves next time. That sounds good. Looks like someone saw a cherry blue in full bloom at Wakefield High School.
Oh my goodness.
I saw it too in Wakefield. I did also. Yeah,
Really?
one of the Japanese cherries. Yes, I was driving by there going to work, and I saw it as well. So I can confirm that.
Yeah, there's some early blooming. Yeah.
Someone mentioned Okame cherry trees are in bloom. Let's see. Any suggestions for a guide to edible plants around here?
Okay, so two things on that. One of which is always get permission. People a lot of times forage in our parks, and again, even if you're doing invasives, which I got no problem doing it, you should get permission if you're doing that. Otherwise, you are taking things and because we have such small places, many places is unsustainable. Having said that, I'm trying to remember. There is a great book by oh my goodness. I can't remember his name now. He wrote three of the best books. Thayer. Samuel Thayer is, in my opinion, the best forager around these days. And part of the reason is that he has an interesting way of writing his books, because most books, if you ever seen an edible plant book or something like that, they have a disclaimer saying, I've heard about this, so be it, but you do this at your own risk. So Samuel Thayer, he starts off saying, look, I don't believe in a disclaimer. I have a claimer. I have tried these 100 times. If you can't back up what you're saying by writing about it in the recipes, then it's a useless book. So he stakes his reputation on the many plants that he's done. He's 3 different books that he's put out there. I own them all and I love it. But again, I've always lived off the land, whether hunted, fishing, or foraging. But I will say though, you do need to get permission before you do that. Much too much foraging going on. It's unsustainable practice in many of our woods, and I unfortunately see it happen all the time.
We have someone that also added Eat Your Roses by Dennis Schreiber, 2011. Someone asked about the Spicebush test that I mentioned. It's basically, if you see a twig and it has little buds on it, if you just do just a little light scratch on the bark, just a little bit, and just sniff it, it's very spicy and aromatic. It's a really cool smell. And then let's see, somebody said Spicebush smells like Twix cereal. I've never had Twix cereal, but that sounds cool. Someone said that the Lowe's in DC is surrounded by service berries.
Which is that?
The Lowe's in Washington, D.C. is surrounded by service berries.
Yeah.
So that's great. So it's nice to get all the intel from you guys that are out in the field so that people can go check out all these different trees.
I will say I have gone fishing, and a lot of times it is a true adage that when the shad blow is in shad bush is in bloom, the shad are running in the rivers. It's very true. It's fantastic, but it's nice that these suggestions came out by people noticing the lands and making other connections to it.
We have someone said many DC parks like Edgewood and LaSalle have large serviceberry plantings. We have a question about tree planting specifically. Someone asked, what is a good tree to plant in a wet area?
Well, there's a ton of things that will grow well in a wet area, and they're used a lot in these in bog gardens and rain retention places. I mean, elderberry grows well, and it can take some chopping, so that's not a bad one if you want to keep it in place. Buttonbush, as I mentioned, is another fantastic one. It also, because the beavers chew on it, is another one that you can kind of chop and keep in place. Other silky dogwood otherwise called swamp dogwood, another very short shrub that can grow in these bog areas. Not so much edible, even though I read it's edible, but possum viburnum. And I remember I was with one of my staff, and we heard it's always edible. We found some ripe ones, and both of us said, okay, let's try this. We both ate it. And at first we kind of had this look on our expression on our face, and we both looked at each other and said, do you like it? No, let's never try that again. So maybe it's edible to some, but as far as me and my staff are concerned, it was terrible. But it's a great thing to grow in these soil retention areas and things like that. It's a wonder. And there's tons of other ones, but those are the ones just come off the top of my head.
River birch.
Alonso, what about native willows for some of those native areas?
Black willow and river birch. I think Melinda
was a river birch, yeah.
Fantastic right there. Alders also grow well, not as showy, but alders do great in swampy areas. And then you can have, if you're lucky enough, that's one of the favorite plants to see woodcock land in. I watched a woodcock just last week during their mating displays. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Any other questions, folks? These are great comments. Any cool blooming trees you've seen in your area? Again, I think we mentioned we are going to be doing a presentation on cherry trees of Tidal Basin and beyond on the 30th of March. So we're going to get that up for registration in the next week or so. So you'll want to watch the Capital Nature calendar for that. And follow us on social media too, please. We're all on Facebook, Instagram. So definitely check those out so you can hear about the events.
Yeah.
And I forgot to post our newsletter, Anna. Do you want to give a little plug for that?
For our newsletter?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to our website, capitalnature.org, and just click on the upper right to find out more, you can get onto our newsletter list, and we send that out once a month, and we highlight lots of cool things that are happening in the DC area. So I definitely recommend, if you want to hear about programs like this, that's the easiest way to do it.
Thank you.
And I'm very happy. We were wondering about doing this during lunchtime and so forth, and it seems to have worked. So I'm kind of glad this is the case. And remember, you can sign up for it or whatever, and then you can find out later on because you can record it, and at your own free time, you can come back and listen to it too. Something I think we kind of need to make clear next time we do these lunchtime types of things, because I think it's fantastic. It's worked very well as far as I'm concerned.
Also, someone mentioned that they love that we have all ages participating today. So we have a.
So I saw, yes, this is great. All different regions and all ages. And again, from what I can tell, the farthest people out so far was what, California, and was it Guatemala?
What about Guatemala?
There you go.
No, they were asking about you.
How a trip to Guatemala.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I actually went to El Salvador to visit family and so forth. I have yet to download the pictures. I had some great videos and stuff like that, even though it was a family visit. But it was so difficult to get into Guatemala because of the travel restrictions. I'd have to get tested, make sure I get them. They can cross the border, do it again, and come back. I need to do that to get back to the United States. It became a nightmare. And not only that, but down there, if you don't have any insurance or anything, and of course our insurance doesn't work down there, it's $160 each time you get tested. So I said, not going to do it. But I had a fun time in El Salvador where I may be buying some property as well.
Cool. I look forward to seeing pictures. I love that Kelly said you encouraged me to actually take a lunch break.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
We love that. And also, we have lots of partner organizations like the Audubon Natural Society. They do a lot of evening programming. We didn't want to program against each other. We want everybody to be able to participate. So we're thinking that the lunchtime is a good time for folks.
And I will say one other thing. I've made this a practice now. When I told you I'm a paper pusher now, I work behind a computer on a lot of things that I do. And one of the things I've made sure to do is, as long as it's nice weather, I eat my lunch in one of the wonderful Arlington parks that I go to. One, you need connection with what's out there. I see what's going on. I know what's going on. And for me, it's a great mental break eating lunch in a wild setting. So if you can possibly do that, please do. You need to be outside.
And the trees like the company.
Cool. Yeah.
Like the company.
So take that 5 minutes to go see the blossoming trees on your street or neighborhood.
Well, folks, we are right on the hour. We did great on time. So thank you so much for joining us. Again, we will do a follow-up email to everyone who's registered with a link to the recording, a link to Alonso's slides and some other resources, and especially we'll capture the ones that are in the chat. And we'll make sure we add some of those authors that were mentioned for the foraging books and stuff, and some upcoming events. So again, check out our different websites, sign up for our newsletters, and we'd love to see you on the next program.
Yeah.
Have a great day, everybody.
Lauren.
Thank you, Alonso. Thanks,
Bye-bye,
Melissa,
folks.
for joining us, everyone.
Guys.
Take care, everyone.
Trees. Enjoy the trees.